Hope everybody's doing well tonight. One of the things I always think about on Wednesday nights is sometimes it's hard to get here. I feel like this is one of the most difficult times to attend is Wednesday night because a lot of us were beaten down by the world. Maybe our job's not going too well, or we're getting beaten down at work. And for me, what makes it difficult is I'm an early riser. So I'm up I get to work about 6 o'clock and get everything done. And on this day, I don't go home. I stay at work because by the time I get home, it's time to come back up here. So I just stay at work and do extra work. And so I haven't eaten, I'm tired, and sometimes I just don't feel like being here. And I think we've all been through that and felt that. And then we also have those that may have gotten a bad health report or something like that, or sometimes we feel like the Blue Devils, that we're not strong enough and we're not good enough. Now, many of us know, and we're going to talk a little bit about basketball, because I love basketball, and I sometimes play it, maybe not very good anymore, but I still play it. So many of us recognize the Blue Devils as a powerhouse. Everybody knows Coach K and what he's done there. And we also know about one of the most historic victories they ever had was when they won their first title. It was in the semifinal game against the UNLV. UNLV was 34-0, had won most of their games by 20 points or more. But the Duke Blue Devils beat them in that game, okay, and went on to win their national title. But many don't remember the year before, in 1990, the national title game, where the Duke Blue Devils faced the UNLV again for the first time. And they lost by 30 points in the national title, which still holds the record as the biggest margin ever in there. And what they were told after that game is they were just not good enough. They're not strong enough. They even questioned Coach K if he was good enough to lead them to a national title. As my son puts it sometimes, they're a pretty good team until they meet men. And he refers that to another team that's talked about a lot that I refer to as somebody that's reminiscent of the Duke Blue Devils. But I think we can put some biblical points behind this in our own lives, because we all have bad days. We all have things that we go through, and sometimes we're just told we're not good enough. But I've always looked at the stories in the Bible, it's what we do after that. If we look at several characters in the Bible, they didn't start out as rich people. They didn't start as something that we would go, wow, there's something out there. They started out as, a lot of them, as slaves, as people that were sold into slavery, and they rose up because of what they put first in their lives. If we look at Daniel, he was basically a slave, but he rose to second in power at a great nation. We look at Joseph. His brother sold him into slavery. Not a very good point there, but he rose to second in command. We can even look at Esther. She was in captivity and rose to be the queen of that kingdom. There are many examples of people struggling in the Bible, but it all comes down to what they did about it. Okay? If you'll turn over to Nehemiah 1, verse 3 through 4. We'll look at a story there, because Nehemiah was a cupbearer. He was a captive, and he hears about Jerusalem, and it strikes him. And in Nehemiah 1, verse 3 through 4, it says, "And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach, and the wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates therefore are burned with fire. And it came to pass, when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept and mourned a certain day and fasted." Here is a person who is distraught about what he had just heard and has affected him greatly, but he did not let the circumstances control what he's going to do, okay? Because if we'll finish verse 4, he says, and I prayed to God. We sometimes discount the power of prayer in our lives because we go through these bad days and we get into what I call my pity parties because we want to sulk about what's going on in our lives instead of taking it to God and praying to him about what's going on. And we could go on with this with the prayer, but he prays a prayer about what has happened to the children of Israel and how they've disrespected God in his commandments. But then he goes on to ask God, please hear me. You know I'm your servant, hear me. And again, we can look at this story and we can see in Nehemiah 1, he's distraught, he's praying to God, but by Nehemiah 6, he's built a wall in 52 days. Okay? And that's something that God created in him to do. And so, as we look at these stories, we need to always turn to God and put him first in our lives because that's what makes the difference in our lives. And no matter if we succeed in this life, we're promised a better life when we get to heaven. So we remember these things this week as we go through the rest of this week and we continue with our work life and what's going on there. And if there's anyone here who needs to obey the gospel or if anyone who needs the prayers of this congregation, please come forward as we gather together to stand and sing.